Welcome back to the channel, guys. So there's all of these rumors of war, and it's leaving many of us on pins and needles. So today we're going to be exploring a topic of critical importance and profound implications: the escalating border crisis in Texas, and of course, the unfolding narrative that is now being pushed. In fact, this narrative is very contradictory to American constitutional principles. Now, we stand at a point where history's lessons are signaling us to think very deeply about the path going forward. Now, if we do not, we may very well find ourselves in the shadows of a global conflict that's reminiscent of World War I. The Lone Star State of Texas finds itself at the epicenter of a national debate, grappling with an influx of illegal immigration that is really challenging Texas's security, its resources, and of course, its sovereignty. In response, Texas has taken some pretty bold steps to be able to fortify its border, including razor wire along the border walls, razors along the perimeter. Actions that have sparked a very fiery contest of wills with the federal government. Now, we've been seeing individual states. We've literally been seeing individual states take the advice of former President Donald Trump, who encourages states to send their troops to Texas in order to help secure the border, which I will be sharing with you guys later in this video. Now, President Joe Biden's administration opposing Texas's initiatives has really ignited a constitutional crisis. Many are calling this the start of a series of civil wars. Now, critics argue that the federal government's response not only undermines the state rights to be able to protect itself, but it really just kind of deviates from the foundational duty to protect the entire nation's borders, calling into question the adherence of constitutional mandates. Now, it makes you wonder, it makes you question, why would the president of the United States strong-arm Texas State Governor Greg Abbott in order to allow the illegal activity of border crossings to continue? Why would they be doing that? Why would he be doing that? The current administration would rather steal money from Russia and hand it over to the Ukraine to support that war than to protect our own borders here at home in the United States. Now, to kind of draw a parallel, let's think back to the early 20th century on the eve of World War I, right? A world not unlike our own today, very similar, stood on the brink. Nations intertwined in a complex web of alliances, international alliances, think NATO, underestimating the catastrophic potential of their rivalries and their disputes. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was merely a spark in a powder keg of global tensions, leading to a conflict that ultimately ended up reshaping the entire world. Today, we pretty much are facing our own powder keg. The border crisis and the federal state standoff are not isolated issues. In fact, they're merely symptoms of a greater systemic weakening of the United States, almost like they're trying to take the United States down from the inside out, eroding the trust in our institutions and potentially setting the stage for larger conflicts. Now, the parallels of World War I are stark, not in the nature of the conflict, but in the underestimating of consequences and, of course, the failure to address the root causes of division and tension. Now, the situation over in Texas, combined with the federal government stance, it raises a lot of questions about sovereignty, governance, and the rule of law. We've already heard from the Supreme Court's decision on this one, but this confrontation, it risks a lot. It risks not only national security, but also the principles of federalism, constitutional fidelity. It exposes vulnerabilities that, if left unaddressed, these could be easily exploited. In fact, we've been warned from the FBI already regarding sleeper cells entering the United States and waiting to attack, much like the strategic misjudgments of the past, which have ultimately paved the world for previous world wars. So the lessons of history, they serve as both a warning and a guide for us, right? The crisis at the Texas border, and of course, the response that it has enlisted from President Joe Biden and the Biden administration, the federal government, it really reflects deeper challenges that are facing America and the world at large. How we respond to these challenges, How we reconcile the demands of security is definitely going to be defining our future. Now, as I mentioned earlier, individual states are now taking the advice of former President Donald Trump, who encouraged states to send their troops, their National Guards, to Texas in order to help them in securing the border. So we're now seeing governors from different states handling this problem very differently. It's a growing concern for different places like California, New York, Arizona, Colorado, Washington, and of course, Texas. Now, of course, we're talking about the southern borders, but we're now at a point where even migrants are worried about, how many people are coming in, mainly due to the fact that they understand that they're all probably competing with one another as space continues to shrink in a lot of the different areas here in the country. Check this out.
The situation at the southern border is showing no signs of easing up. Now the state of Florida is stepping up to help stem the flow of migrants into the United States. And that involves sending hundreds of Florida troops to Texas. Our Mark Wilson is here now to explain. So Mark, bring us up to speed.
Well, it's not the first time he's sent folks to Texas. Keep that in mind. Governor DeSantis said today that he's deploying members of the Florida State Guard and the Florida National Guard both to Texas. And the plan now is to help them assist Texas officials to try to get a better handle on the spike in undocumented immigrants right now that are crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. And this, of course, comes as the state of Texas continues to butt heads with the federal government. A dispute that stems from the Supreme Court's recent decision here to allow federal agents to remove razor wire that Texas recently installed along the border. Governor DeSantis argues that the states have the right to defend their borders, regardless of what the federal government does, which is why he is sending Florida troops to Texas. And he says specifically sending the State Guard along with the National Guard because he said that's necessary for sovereignty. He says today that the federal government would have no control over our State Guard troops, unlike National Guard troops.
Things are spiraling out of control very quickly here, folks, and it really looks as if we're in for a possible civil war. And this comes as more and more states are pushing back on this narrative of migrants just flowing into their districts. But some of them are now reaching their limit when it comes to resources. And, well, this limit is leading to something like this.
In front of City Council, it's clear the plans are made and they're not changing.
If we were to have to sustain this level, it is unsustainable from a staff perspective, from a space perspective, and certainly from a financial perspective.
Evan Dreyer from the mayor of Denver's office made it clear. Starting Monday, hundreds of migrant families living in shelters will begin being discharged one by one. 743 families in total, according to advocates.
We are doing everything that we possibly can to avoid encampments.
But the questions in this room don't always lead to answers. Like what happens when someone is kicked out of the shelter without a plan to get housing?
If people begin to form a camp, will they be asked to sort of move along without a destination? Will they be allowed to remain together? What happens then?
Yeah.
The city says they won't allow people to camp on the streets. Outreach is the only answer so far.
Continuing to do really intensive outreach if an encampment forms, working with people on the ground in an encampment to try to provide them with as many options as possible.
I'm deeply concerned. I think we have stretched our city resources to the limit.
And this isn't just some remote thing either. As much as these people want to help these migrants, it's very clear that resources are actually limited. I mean, look at this, guys. Families are getting evicted out of hotels, and now they're not sure where to go. Some of them went to Seattle, and thankfully they got help. The problem, much like Denver, is that they just can't be helped forever. So this story shows that 90 families would be given just a week of free rooms. After that, they have to think about other ways to kind of go about things for themselves. And this is also happening in states and cities that are actually pro-immigration. So right here it says that Chicago's delaying evicting around 5,600 migrants from shelters until March because they're trying to find additional housing for them. Their mayor, Brandon Johnson, he says that this delay would give these people more time to find work, adding at least 30 to 60 days for them to be able to do so. Now, a lot of people are getting upset because if migrants get work, then that means that Americans can't get those jobs. He says that this time is needed to give every person and every single family that comes to their city enough time to process their work authorization, find housing, and of course, ultimately start a new life in Chicago.
Thousands of migrants will be able to stay in Chicago shelters longer than first thought. Late this afternoon, the mayor extended the eviction deadline, which was set to begin on Thursday. CBS 2's Sabrina Franza is live at City Hall with a look at the changing shelter rules. Sabrina.
The mayor reiterating that temporary housing was just that. It was a temporary solution, not meant to be long term. Still, now some migrants who were facing an eviction deadline on Thursday now have an additional 60 days to find somewhere else to go. Those asylum seekers that were supposed to leave January 16th through February 29th get that 60-day extension. The people that were going to be evicted March 1st through 28th have a 30-day extension. Anyone new who comes into shelter gets the original 60-day notice when they enter Chicago's housing. The mayor made nods to both New York and Denver, two other cities who have received thousands of migrants bussed from Texas. He referenced their temporary housing deadlines and pointed out that Chicago can be no different because this mission, as is not sustainable. The goal is to allow people to stay for winter and for as long as it takes for them to receive work permits. However, it is notable that not everybody currently living in city shelter is eligible for a work permit.
This is also why we're seeing more of these government officials calling on the Biden administration to provide them with even more funding, even more resources, so that they can ultimately kind of handle the influx of migrants. Well, that's what tax-paying Americans are kind of frustrated with, because there are those of us that are out there that are actually struggling as well. Now, off the top of my head, look at people on fixed income, right? Social Security, SSI, SSDI, right? Veterans, these people also need help. And this is the concern that many continue to raise. And while we can understand that it is natural for us to want to help others, but our leaders should also understand that many people here at home aren't that well off either. Which leads me to New York City, the Big Apple. Did you guys know that the homeless shelter over there has spiked 53%? Pretty insane, right? To make matters worse, it seems as if some of these homeless people that are being asked to move out of these shelters are veterans, people who fought for the United States, people that risked their lives for us. I mean, that's a bit disgraceful to think of, right? To ask our own veterans to make space for migrants. Now, we can understand that these people are looking for help too. Some are looking for asylum. They're looking for protection. But to give them shelter at the expense of our homeless veterans, it's a tough one. This practice, though, it's not going well with a lot of Americans, especially for those in Boston. Why? Well, here's why. Check this out.
Hundreds of beds now cover the indoor track and soccer fields where neighborhood children usually play. Thanks for joining us. I'm David Wade.
And I'm Lisa Hughes. Dozens of families are set to move into the shelter any moment now. WBZ's Beth Germano is in Roxbury tonight, where the community is torn over this plan.
It's been a quick conversion for the Melnia Cass Recreational Center in Roxbury. Beds and sleeping bags, play spaces, bathrooms and other necessities, all to help migrant families arriving in large numbers in the state.
It's going to house up to 400 individuals right now.
Governor Healy began discussing the idea a week ago. Moved by the recent plight of families, many now camping out at Logan Airport, and a state shelter system stretched to the limit.
We're here today because we really don't have a choice.
The issue here is that the people of Boston are not very happy with this decision. Some of them even say that these government officials, they care more about the migrants than they do about them. And they're the ones that are paying their taxes. Now, I understand that this is a very polarizing issue at this point, but we got to be objective, right? Now, what do you guys think about all this? As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to be here every single day of the week. I'm going to keep you guys updated and informed on everything that's going on. I appreciate you guys hitting the like button for the video. Thanks for sharing the video. Thanks for subscribing. And I'm going to see you guys on the next one. Y'all be safe out there.